This week on BSD Now, Chris gets eaten by internet goblins, we interview OpenBSD's newest developer, Brent Cook, about the portable version of LibreSSL, and Bob Beck writes in to tell us how LibreSSL is unsafe on FreeBSD. Plus the latest news in your emails on BSD Now, the place to be, SD.
BSD Now, episode 48, Liberating SSL, recorded July 30th, 2014. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
And we're glad to have you guys with us this week. We got an exciting show coming straight at you and some cool headlines, so let's get right into it. So first up this week, some FreeBSD news. It looks like quarterly status reports have come out,
Yes.
Alan. And this was a busy quarter. There was a lot of stuff that was talked about in the status reports, including some stuff having to do with releases, how release branches are supported, major releases now getting 5 years over their lifespan.
Yep.
Very cool, very cool. And I saw another patch about this today, but auto mounters in the works,
Yes,
hoping to replace AMD. That's fantastic.
I saw a presentation about that at in Cambridge. It's looking very good.
Yeah, I think he just sent a call for testing out this morning. There's a patch against current, if anybody wants to take a look at that. And it sounds pretty nice.
Yeah.
It sounds pretty nice. I'm eager to see it in service.
Yes, it's looking quite useful. And so, yeah, the status report has a lot of stuff, although I know a couple of things didn't make it in time for the status report, so the next one will probably be even bigger.
Okay.
But yeah, so, the core team, they had their election and they're working and they talked about that, although most of what's in this status report was obviously from before the election, so it's covering, the retiring of NATs and replacement with Bugzilla and setting up the election and all that stuff. And the ports team has obviously done a lot of work and, they replaced the secretary, added new members, updated the port manager lurker stuff, and worked on the quarterly branches. As you discussed, the release engineering team has adopted the new system. They extended the end of life of FreeBSD 9.2 to the end of this year. To give more time to upgrade to 9.3, and B, because there was some confusion about the fact that 9.1 was going to outlive 9.2 because of the staggered release cycle. And in this case, they just sorted it out. And like you talked about, we're going to have basically stable branches supported for 5 years rather than timing it based on when the release came out. So it'll be much easier to manage, and it will also allow for kind of like a cleanup release at the end of a release branch. So, just as 9's stable or maybe probably won't happen for 9's stable, but as, at the end of the life of a branch, they could cut one more version that would provide, all the stuff that went into all the fixes that went in after, right? Like 9.3 just came out, and it's probably going to be one of the last releases on the 9 branch. So if anybody finds things and fixes them, and that goes into 9 stable, that's never going to get released, because doing another release would extend the lifetime of that branch by 2 years under the old policy.
But under people don't want to do that.
And under the new one, the end date is already set, and so they can do an extra release to get those fixes out to people. And
which is a good deal.
Some really interesting news from Chelsea. They make the T4 10 gigabit NIC and the T5 40 gigabit Ethernet adapters. And they're working on making the in-kernel iSCSI target and initiator stack in FreeBSD support the hardware offload in their fancier cards. So that when you're running, a FreeNAS or a TrueNAS or something with one of these cards in it, you can offload some of the work of the iSCSI onto the network card, which is specifically designed for it. And that means less work happening on the CPU. It means you can support more traffic and more easily saturate that 40 gigabit link with your iSCSI traffic.
Dang, nice. I see. They've just had a lot of cool stuff happen. And as kind of a plug to the foundation too, I guess the foundation sponsored work resulted in about 226 commits to FreeBSD from April to June. So that's awesome. Keep up the good work.
Between Glenn and a couple other people working on, and then all the people doing sponsored projects, there's lots of commits.
Hmm. Yeah, something of interest to me is the UEFI boot stuff.
Yes.
Looks like it's gotten some work. Looks like they're building some test snapshots where people can try it out, try the old BIOS and UEFI mode, and they're hoping to make that merged into 10 stable and have it.
Yeah, in time for FreeBSD 10.1. Currently, the issue is that the way the UEFI loader works, it actually looks for the first UFS partition on the disk and uses that. And so the issue being, obviously, it doesn't work with root on ZFS currently. But we'll have to see what we can do about that. The EUFI stuff doesn't currently work with root on ZFS. Basically, the loader that Nathan Whitehorn wrote just finds the first UFS partition on the disk and boots that.
Sure.
Partly because otherwise what they would have had to do is your loader.conf and all the variables and stuff would actually have to be stored on the UEFI partition, the little FAT32 partition that's at the on the disk. And that kind of is a POLA violation, right? When you're updating files, when you're trying to change the kernel configuration on your FreeBSD machine, you don't expect to have to write it to a FAT32 partition somewhere else on the disk. And so that's why it's kind of works strange at the moment. But they're working on sorting that out. I was talking with Ed Mast in Cambridge specifically about this and seeing what we can do to make it do EUFI with root on ZFS.
Yeah, that would be very, very handy. And, of course, I'd love to see that expanded to do boot environments as well.
Yep.
Be able to have snapshot selection and the like would be fantastic.
Yep. And then there's also work.
That would give us an excuse to get rid of Grub, by
yes,
the way.
It would.
So,
yep.
That would be awesome.
Hans-Peter Selesky worked on queues for BSD, which is something, it's kind of like Fuse, but it's for character devices instead of file systems. And that's part of what's required for a bunch of the Linux compatibility drivers and stuff to actually, I think the webcam driver stuff uses that, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, and a couple other things. So seeing that getting some love is also great.
Well, also the VT system console replacement is had a lot of work happen. Matter of fact, I need to build a test image with that here at some point here in the near future. Let people start playing with it. I'm curious to see how it works. It'd be great not to lose your console access when you're running an Intel or AMD driver.
Yes,
for sure.
Yeah, so that's enabled by default on
11 now.
On 9.3, isn't not?
No, I don't think VT's in 9.3.
I'm pretty sure it is.
Oh, it is? Sure. Is it on by default?
I think so, yes.
Okay. They said they're planning to have it in 10.1 release, is what the status says here.
But I'm pretty sure there is something with the...
Oh, that would be cool if it's in 9.3.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I know at some point they have it so you can switch between the two with a sysctl or like a boot variable and stuff. But yes, it'll definitely be interesting to see that going ahead as well. And then, yes, we'll probably mentioned the auto mounter.
Yeah, when I say we got August is coming right around the corner here, we're going to roll another stable image for PCBSD, and we'll turn that on if it's already in 10 stable in a workable form.
Cool.
Start giving it a shot, see what happens.
Yep. And then, obviously, the status report about package mentions that package 1.3 is imminent, although you'll hear later in the show
we'll have
that
more
it's actually released. But the big feature there is switching versions of stuff like Perl and PHP and so on no longer requires you to manually resolve the conflicts. The solver does it for you. So that's a big thing. Then QEMU BSD user enabled ports building, which uses the QEMU user mode to be able to
with Podria.
Yeah, to basically be able to cross compile ARM and I think MIPS stuff using QEMU only to run the actual binaries, but all the shell scripts and stuff actually run natively, and so it's really fast.
Yeah, it does ARM v6, MIPS 32, and MIPS 64. Yes. It looks like. So that's actually pretty cool.
And they're apparently working on PowerPC and Spark 64 as well.
Okay, nice.
And then Alexander Motin, the king of speed, as I like to call him, is working on the the FreeBSD RPC stack, specifically making it so the NFS server in FreeBSD can keep up with the changes he made to the disk layer. So, making optimizations and improving the SMP scalability so NFS can handle more transactions per second. and allowing it to actually make use of a 40-core system
Nice.
without all the cores just being stuck waiting for lock contention. So with those changes, he managed to get it up to 600,000 requests per second on modern hardware.
Okay.
And then he says, with some other changes, he expects to get it even better. He made some changes to the CAM layer for the in-kernel iSCSI server. And with the changes he made, he got the request rate to go from 200,000 a second to 600,000 IOPS a second, which is quite a big change. And he says it has the potential to actually reach 1 million requests per second. And that will completely saturate dual 10 gigabit Ethernet links, making 4 kilobyte requests, compared to the old userland iSCSI server, which on the exact same hardware with the equivalent configuration was only able to do about 100,000 IOPS. And that project was obviously sponsored by IX Systems. And then there's also a status update from ZFS Guru, which is a storage appliance, an overview of Konstantin Blesov's Postgres performance improvements, and also running FreeBSD as an application on top of the L4 microkernel. And some improvements to the SDIO driver, fixes for TempFS so that it can basically withstand some of the stress tests and not actually just die. And then I think that's about it.
Okay.
Oh, there was some progress on the ARM64 port as well for ARM v8. Chris is having some internet issues, so you're stuck with just me for the rest of the show. Anyway, the next news item is about package 1.3.0. So PKG 1.3.0 came out after 9 months of hard work, including about 67,000 new lines of code, work by 29 different contributors. Some of the biggest changes, as we talked about, the new solver uses a real SAT solver. So when you're upgrading, say between Perl 5.12 and 5.16 or something, you no longer have to manually do package set -o and update the origin in order to avoid it saying, hey, you can't install Perl 5.16 because Perl 5.12 conflicts with it. So it solves most of those problems automatically. So now package upgrade command should be much, much more usable. It also now installs local files as well as resolves their dependencies from remote repositories, and allows you to do a bunch of other stuff. They also imported a bunch of the sandboxing code to use Capsicum and do as much of the stuff in a safe environment as possible, and did some works to improve portability as well. They've also reworked the package installation process to be safer and properly handle the SCHG flag, so the system immutable flag, so that happens properly. They made a number of important modifications to the locking system for finer-grained locks so that more stuff can happen in parallel. They've made a lot more use of libucl, which is the config parser they're using, and they've simplified the API quite a bit. It definitely looks like they're going to have... This is going to be a very big improvement, and looking forward to 1.4 in the future as well. But the other thing is that after they released 1.3.0 on July 23rd, they quickly released 1.3.1, 1.3.2, and 1.3.3 with a number of important fixes. And now you can actually, when you're using Poudriere to build the repository, you can actually have more of that be multi-CPU as well. And our last news item is FreeBSD after install security tasks. This is a very common question we get. It's like, okay, I've installed FreeBSD, but how do I lock it down? And so this is just a kind of a quick guide that covers some of the key points you need to do. So number 1, put locks on the doors. Talks about locking down your SSH. Set up your SSH key and with your authorized keys and change the configuration so that you don't allow challenge response or password authentication, and only allow public key. Another thing you should definitely consider is some kind of solution for banning bots that are attacking your SSHD. I use DenyHost, but SSHguard or failed to ban or some service like that is going to block any Chinese IP addresses that are hammering on your SSHD. More than 5 failed login attempts means you don't get to play with my SSH daemon anymore. Number 2, oil change. Obviously using FreeBSD update to fetch and install the latest errata patches. Right? You want to make sure that you're got all the latest security updates. Also talks about how to use the cron tab. FreeBSD-update has a cron command. So you set it up with your cron tab, and what it does is it sleeps for a random amount of time between 1 second and 1 hour, so that when everybody crons FreeBSD update to run at midnight, everybody's doesn't run at exactly the same time. So that allows you to set that up and running, and it'll be fetching stuff in the background, and then whenever you want to install the updates, you just have to do the install. You already have everything. Number 3, babysitting the children. Obviously, packages. It talks about using package update and package audit, find out which package you have that maybe need to be upgraded, and then upgrade them, or using package upgrade to handle it all automatically, and also how to do the same thing with ports using port master. You know, if you're custom compiling stuff because the vanilla binary package isn't quite to your liking, then you should use something like port master to make that faster and automatic. Number 4, close the windows. This one talks about, you know, checking what services are actually running and, you know, make sure only the necessary stuff is running. The command he had there that greps for TCP4 or UDP4, you can actually shorten that a bit. Just netstat minus an minus f inet4 will only show your IPv4 stuff, and it's a little shorter than adding a grep, and you can avoid the pipe and the fork and all that fun stuff. But it allows you to check out, make sure that only the things you expect to be running are running. Another useful app is SockStat. What it shows is basically the same thing, but it shows the process ID and file descriptor of each of those sockets, so you can actually more easily find which process is opening, you know, port 514 or whatever. And then you see that you want to lock down your syslogd so it doesn't run on the network unless you're using the network for something. And you can see now that port 514 isn't open anymore. And number 5, keeping tabs. You should definitely sign up for the FreeBSD announce and FreeBSD security mailing lists. They're very low traffic. You only get email when something very important is going on, and you should know about it. And, you know, that's some of the basic things you should definitely consider when you're setting up your, after you install your first FreeBSD system. So next up, we have our sponsor for the week. That's IX Systems. Great people over there, as always. So if you need a machine to do pretty much anything, you know, I've bought from a tiny router with a bunch of gigabit ports to handle my fancy internet connection. You know, a little E3 Xeon, give me enough power, but not use a lot of, give me enough oomph without using a lot of electricity. Up through, you know, I have some dual E5 systems in my basement now. Can't have enough processors. And they basically can build everything in between, right? I've bought from a little 1U short depth server to be a router, a small 1 and 2U servers to be co-located in various places and get the job done, or, you know, a giant storage box with 36 4TB hard drives. Whatever you end up needing, they can do it, and they do it quickly, and they do it very, very well. You know, they have this QA process. They run the system for a couple days first before they ship it to you, and that ensures that everything actually works when you get it. And that's a big improvement over some places I used before I fell in love with IX Systems. And they also have this handy guide on their website, the ultimate guide to buying a new server for open source. Kind of provides you that marketing material you need to convince management that, hey, these guys know what they're doing, and they can give us the machine that's actually going to work better with our open source software or stack or whatever we're running, as opposed to the off-the-shelf server from Dell or HP or whoever. So, if you need hardware, you should definitely check them out. That's ixsystems.com/BSDnow.
And we're joined now by Brent Cook, a software architect and developer over at OpenBSD. And we're glad to have you with us today, Brent.
Thank you.
So first question we ask everyone, tell us a little bit first about how you first found and got involved with BSD.
Well, you mean BSD in general?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah. Actually, I used FreeBSD a long time ago, back, I guess, like 1998 or so.
Mhm.
FreeBSD 1 and 2. I ran some web servers at the University of Texas for about 3 or 4 years. And basically, that was kind of an interesting thing. Then I graduated and really hadn't done a whole lot with it. I worked at a company that embedded Socris appliances and basically created little firewalls for specific applications. We would tunnel like Ethernet, voice over IP between sites and that kind of stuff using FreeBSD. Um, More recently, though, I actually work at Boundary and work on basically the software agent that gets deployed on a lot of different operating systems, from Windows to embedded appliances to everything in between. And we actually embed OpenSSL with the meter to communicate securely back to our software as a service. And basically, OpenSSL has always been sort of a troublesome point with our builds. They're very slow. It's very clunky to get to work right. The API is not that great. Anyway, after the whole Heartbleed thing, I started looking around and thinking, well, what should we do to maybe fix some of the sort of fundamental issues we've got? When I saw that the OpenBSD guys were working on Liberating SSL, it seemed like a great opportunity to maybe try it out and see how well it might work within like all the different build environments that supported work. So I actually just sort of worked on in my free time on basically a little build environment that could just slurp all the LibreSSL code out and create sort of an automatic build so I could test them against the stuff we work on at work. I worked on that for maybe a couple months, and I guess some folks at the OpenBSD camp noticed. I didn't really make a big deal of it, but I did push a few patches here and there that just sort of fixed some little trivial sort of portability issues. And eventually, while I was on vacation, actually Theo started emailing me changes to like the PRNG and the ways that things are going to be changing with the source code. And we basically just started working together on that, and then eventually invited me out to Slovenia to work on the hackathon. So that's
Nice.
how it came about.
Yeah, so I guess that kind of answers the question, but you've only recently just become an official OpenBSD developer. What was the process like to become one?
Oh, the process. Well, I mean, I guess basically, I posted some patches to the OpenBSD mailing list. Some of them were like, "Oh, yeah, that makes sense." Some of them was like, "What? Are you crazy? This doesn't make any sense at all." And just part of it was just the very fact that I didn't get intimidated that much and just storm off or hide. Right. I think that was part of sort of the initiation process. I'm used to some pretty tough cookies at work and various places, and so it's not really that big a deal. It's nothing personal. I mean, if the code sucks, it sucks. So you might as well fix it.
Sure.
So anyway, that was sort of part of the process. Just sort of can you keep contributing and deal with criticism or changes. I guess the other part was basically I kind of already had a port working, so it was really just a matter of please come out and help us get this part working. So those are pretty much the two things: just being able to sort of stick with them and having already contributed something that they could use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've definitely heard a lot about LibreSSL now. What were some of the specifics though about going through the process of getting it to a portable version? How did you guys walk through that process?
Well, I have access to a lot of build machines and virtual machines and that kind of stuff, so I've already sort of familiar with things that are portable and things that are not. And so sort of the first process was just looking at the BSD make files, seeing what they're building, and just more or less mimicking that process in sort of a portable build environment. I chose Auto Tools just because it's something I'm familiar with, and it happens to work on like everything under the sun. There are some cooler tools. I really like the way that Boring SSL uses CMake, and that's something I considered as well. But just for the initial ports, it made sense to sort of just go with Auto Tools, just because it's something that will work on everything from HPUX to whatever kind of crazy stuff you have out there. And then once we basically got the build framework going in, there were just a few places where things had to become more portable. One of them was, of course, the PRNG. You've heard a little bit about arc4 random and get entropy and all that kind of stuff. When I first started the port, none of that stuff existed within Linux, and there were sort of some versions for like FreeBSD and Mac OS X, and of course nothing for Windows exactly the same like that. So the first thing I did was actually now I'm embarrassed about it. Before I wasn't didn't know any better, but it's like, oh, I'll just pull in LibBSD. It looks perfect.
Sure.
And no real discredit to the LibBSD developers, but at least the implementations were not really up to the security standards that OpenBSD would like to use. So that's one of the first things I actually found out about that being bad based on a blog post that got pointed to my site. Luckily, I was on GitHub and I was able to figure out that I was getting all this traffic from this blog post saying how awful this code is. So, so I backtracked and looked at the comments and was like, yeah, that's wrong, that's wrong.
Yeah,
my first attempt was actually pulled in a PRNG tool, or it's basically a PRNG library, and I feel so bad because I can't remember what it was called now. Get libottery, which is kind of a portable version of arc4 random / get entropy kind of thing. It does have some interesting ideas as far as how it's able to maintain security. Like it will hold on to file descriptor to dev random once it gets it, so you don't have to worry about file descriptor exhaustion. Although there's other ways that things can fail, like accidental FD closures and that sort of stuff. Anyway. Theo took a little look at that and was like, I don't know, it's kind of good, but it's not exactly what we need. So anyway, after seeing that there was a real need for a portable PRNG, I basically started working with the LibreSSL team more as far as what are the parts that need to be separated from the actual OpenBSD implementation. The get entropy new syscall was added so that other OSs didn't have to implement something like the OpenBSD sysctl. Other things like things like memory allocation, fork protection, all that kind of stuff can be sort of portably handled between OSs. That all stuff that's been refactored, so it makes it easier to push out and make sure everyone has a nice secure implementation.
Cool. Yeah, so I guess what are some of the differences between the OpenBSD version and the portable version as far as like code and features go?
Well, one big difference actually is that the OpenBSD version actually builds everything with that it can with assembly language versions. The portable version actually, for the initial shot, builds everything using the C versions. Part of the reason was just simply I didn't really have a whole lot of time yet to look so much at the assembly versions. There are some ABI tweaks that one might have to do for different OSs. The other reason actually is interesting enough. I did some initial benchmarks of, like, say, the block ciphers, which are usually pretty interesting from my point of view. I do a lot of block transfers, not so much as far as handshakes and that kind of stuff. And actually, at least in my testing, even with all the extra flags that, like, say, Ubuntu adds, comparing Ubuntu stock OpenSSL to LibreSSLs, it's about almost like a 2x performance increase just using the C versions rather than the assembly versions. I haven't dug into it a whole lot as far as why that is. I tried building with the same C flags. But essentially, when we do add assembly versions, we'll probably have to critically analyze which things make sense and which things can we jettison, and it's like, well, is this really worth being assembly? Are compilers smart enough now, moving forward, that we're not trying to sort of work around some weird bug in GCC 4.1 or some weird old Solaris compiler or something like that. So I think moving forward, we probably won't move forward with features that don't make sense on, like, say, contemporary systems or contemporary compilers.
Sure.
Some other things, of course, that are a little bit different are, of course, the underlying C library is a little bit different between them. We actually disabled some tests because we test the block IO subsystem, which does hostname resolution. We found that almost every OS does hostname resolution in a slightly different way. And so we were unable to find sort of a subset of tests that would actually pass on every OS because they would flip-flop as far as what they decided a hostname was or not. So there's some cases where there are some differences in behavior. Of course, arc4 random is still continuing to be improved day by day as we get things like new system calls added to the various operating systems to help us get entropy in a better way, better fork protection, that kind of stuff. That stuff will just get better and better as people start looking at the code, realizing that these features in OpenBSD, these aren't just for the paranoid. These are actually very useful security features. I mean, today's paranoid corner case is tomorrow's mass exploit. So it makes sense to be prepared.
Cool. So do you have is there a specific group of people working on maintaining the portable specific changes?
That's actually kind of interesting. So far, I've mostly been the one pushing all the changes in. We do get a fair amount of feedback from the community and have sort of discussions. But for the most part, it's really just me and Bob Beck pushing out the actual portable releases, doing the testing, that kind of stuff. So we're sort of focusing a lot on the community. I've been able to find a lot of great suggestions and basically improvements from various people, either emailing us, both on the GitHub page, on random forums. Sometimes you have to sort of search that stuff out. And we're integrating things as fast as we can. It's not my full-time project. In fact, I pretty much sort of maybe spend maybe 10 hours a week on it or so. So we're sort of hoping more for community input. Like for instance, Windows support is it's sort of working. I've got some internal stuff going, but I'm really hoping that someone will step up and decide that they want to be like the Windows maintainer. That kind of stuff. It's going to be difficult for like a set of like say 2 people to support every OS under the sun. So we're sort of slow walking that in.
Well, yeah, because obviously it's better if the person who's in charge of supporting that OS is very familiar with that OS, as opposed to maybe not so much. So I guess you kind of touched on it already, but how has the community reacted to Liberating SSL? Are you getting a lot of patches and feedback from users?
Oh yeah, for sure. We've gotten quite a few patches. It's interesting. Some of them are things like for instance, let's take the issetu GID system call. Most OSs have an implementation. Maybe not all of them work exactly right in some older versions, that kind of stuff. And we're continuing to sort of report deviations and that kind of stuff to the various OS providers. But Linux, of course, doesn't actually have one at all. And I tried to avoid looking at the history too much about it, but apparently it's been sort of a long-standing thing. Did I lose you guys?
No, we're still.
Okay. So anyway, so we originally got bug reports from Musil libc, which is an embedded C library, and people were like, well, if we could just sort of if-def all this code out, we got all this extra protection code for glibc, let's just if-def this stuff out and just sort of make Musil work. Kind of pushed back on that and said, well, there's no real good way to properly detect, that this is a safe, that, getOxval is going to work on all the OSs. You might be running on the wrong kernel. You might have something weird in your environment. There's no good, safe way to detect, are you running in a privileged environment on Linux yet. So actually I worked with the Musil developers and got them to actually implement the issetu GID call. And it wasn't like just a slam dunk. I mean, there's a lot of things to consider. But it actually worked out better. I think we actually have a more secure version now in Musil than we would have had if we tried to do some workarounds. I saw that there were some patches out for usulibc as well. So there's some places where the portability code is actually working backwards, where rather than us adding more and more portability code, instead we're sort of bringing some things out to the actual OSs or libcs to better support a secure environment.
Right. I guess kind of the opposite of the approach OpenSSL had is like, well, we'll just have to deal with whatever the OS provides. It's more, these are open source projects. We can actually get the right fix pushed up into the operating system.
Right. It'll be interesting to see how, like, say, some proprietary operating systems deal with it as well. We haven't, I can only stir so many pots, but we've had some people try it on HPUX and Solaris 10 and various OSs where they may not be as well supported, or they may sort of have some interesting historical quirks. So it'll be interesting to see how those kind of things work out, because we can't necessarily say they're super secure. It might be difficult to get entropy, for instance, on an HPUX machine or an IRIX machine. We saw an IRIX port out there. It'll be interesting to see if upstream vendors also decide to sort of backport some of the BSD interfaces that we've added. The code's actually sort of already, it will automatically detect, do you have get entropy, do you have this or that, and will automatically use it if it's available. So, it might be easier for a lot of people to just go ahead and implement those in their OSs than trying to work around it with portability shims.
Sure. Well, changing gears a little bit, can you tell us a little bit of the background on the some of the Linux random number generator drama of this last week, and what was your take on the whole thing?
What was that again?
The Linux random number generation drama this last week with portable Libre SSL.
Oh, sure. There was an Ars Technica article. I suppose that's what you're referring to, right? I know. sometimes I can't keep track of all the dramas at once.
Which one?
Which drama are you talking about? So yeah, there was an article published saying that LibreSSL was vulnerable to not detecting that the PIDs changed if there's a wraparound. Basically, sort of a specific set of cases has to apply. But it looked like a fairly corner case. We actually had discussed that issue a few days prior to the article even being published. The current workarounds that we had in place seemed like, well, this seemed like such a corner case, and then, of course someone figures it out and tries it. Something's actually kind of interesting is we had the patch sort of early in the morning. Everyone was traveling and jet lagged, and poor Bob Beck's like getting off the plane. He's like, oh, could someone please apply this patch and try it out,
Mm-hmm.
And so, we got the patch out and pushed it out. It really wasn't that big a deal. And I try not to get involved too much in like web controversies.
Yeah.
Reading comments on articles just depresses me. But in the end, we're just trying to get something out there that's secure and works well. I posted some things on the Linux Weekly News article about the same, and got some nice suggestions from Pack's team and some others as far as other approaches we could try to shore up this approach even better. It's kind of weird to start walking a fine line between making it super secure and making it still be compatible with all the software that's out there.
Mm-hmm.
We've thought about say marking the pages as not inheritable by children, but if someone calls like a create or a fork call directly, then the process is going to crash. So we're sort of carefully trying to come up with workarounds that can work and still not break existing software. This might be something where we need perhaps some extra kernel assistance as well. We're still sort of weighing our options as far as what's the penultimate fix in that area.
Mm-hmm. So I guess we've also seen a lot of old code get ripped out of LibreSSL. But are there any features that LibreSSL has that regular OpenSSL doesn't have?
It does have some interesting new features. It does have some extra cryptographic algorithms. Cha-Cha was one of them that was added earlier on. I don't know if I should take the lid off this or not, but actually we're sort of working on some new APIs as well that could actually make programming SSL easier. I don't want to necessarily say yes, you should look at these APIs right now. They're actually in the CVS tree if you look carefully enough. So you can actually look at them and sort of see how they work. But that's actually possibly in my opinion, one of the better value adds is OpenSSL is damn hard to get right just using the regular APIs, even if it worked perfectly. Because the semantics are just so crazy. But we basically did some stuff where you sort of create more or less, I guess you might call it a simple API, an API that's I just want to create an SSL connection between these two hosts.
That's all I need.
All
just
the best features, and please add what's missing.
Yeah, we were
so I don't screw it up.
Yeah, there was actually discussion about something like that at the FreeBSD Developer Summit about, is this something that could kind of fit with our Capsicum Casper type system of just, you just ask for an SSL connection and provide some parameters, and it's like, how do we make a sane API for that? And so it'll be interesting to see what the LibreSSL approach to that was.
Right. Yeah, I don't want to necessarily say have people start criticizing the API, because it probably needs to go through about 3 or 4 revisions before you really know if it works. I believe like FTP was ported to it to see if could it work in a real application. So, but it's still a little too early. But that's definitely on our minds as far as making the API and making it easier for people to get a safe, secure environment.
Cool. Well, it's been kind of mind-blowing just to see all the insecure and unmaintained code that was just living in OpenSSL. But one of the things Bob Beck said was that they got the important crypto bits right. Has there been any thorough review of the cryptographic parts of the code base, or is that planned to be done in the future?
We certainly have noticed a few weird vestigial tails within the cryptographic portions of the system. It's definitely code that looks like it was written by mathematicians or PhD students. Not to discount PhD students, but lots of A, B, C, D, E, F, G kind of variable namings. We've been building some things with some static analysis and things. I've noticed like there's a lot of sort of almost like genetically old code, meaning code that doesn't really do anything. It doesn't hurt anything, but there's definitely some places we'll probably need to do some pruning. Although as a U.S. citizen, I really don't hack too much on the crypto algorithms themselves, just because that's sort of I don't necessarily say it's a complete no-no, but it's something that typically I try to shy away from an OpenBSD contribution point of view.
Sure.
Cool. Well, was there anything else you wanted to mention before we let you
go? No. So all I can say is people keep, everyone keeps testing out the releases. We really appreciate all the eyes that are on it. We're basically going to keep putting out releases probably once every week or so, just sort of snapshots as far as where we're going. There's still a lot more code refactoring, deleting, all that kind of stuff going on. So that hasn't really stopped. It's just a matter of people's spare time, that kind of stuff. I think it's been great. As far as the initial reaction, I'm kind of looking forward to seeing where things end up in November as we get closer to the end of closer to the release date of FreeBSD 5.6.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, thank you so much for being on the show with us today, Brent.
Thank you, guys.
Been fantastic, and we'll be back with our next segment in just a moment.
This week's episode of BSD Now is brought to you by TarSnap. Online backups for the truly paranoid. It's very important to make sure you back up your data, but you also have to worry about the security of your backups. If you don't want the files you back up to actually become the security vector that somebody uses to get access to your private data. And that's why TarSnap is the best solution, because your files are encrypted locally and then transmitted online. And that means that even the people at TarSnap cannot access your private files. Only you hold the crypto keys that encrypt your files. And unlike other services that promise things like this, you can actually get the source code for the TarSnap client and audit it yourself and compile that source code into the binary yourself. So that's the only way you can be absolutely sure that nothing unexpected or untoward is happening with your files. And that's what makes TarSnap such a good service. And the other great thing is the pricing. It's only 25 cents per gigabyte per month, and it's pay as you go. So you deposit whatever amount of money you want, and then you start backing up your stuff. And when your balance gets low, you get an email and you put in more money. That means you can never get an unexpected bill because you only can use up the money you've already put into the system. So thank you to TarSnap for sponsoring the show. And if you want to sign up, go over to tarsnap.com/bsdnow and check it out. All it takes is $5 to get started, and you will quickly fall in love with it. So in the roundup this week, we have FreeBSD Mastery, Storage Essentials. So Michael W. Lucas is working on his next book, and as always with that, he offers the in-progress drafts at a discount. So if you want to go over to his website, Tilted Windmill Press, and buy the book, even though it's not finished yet, you will get the current draft version as a PDF with no DRM. And then as you read through that, and if you find anything wrong with it, you can let Michael know and he can get it fixed. But also that means that as the progress on the drafts improve, you'll get the newer versions, and you get the electronic version of the final draft as well for the lower price than you would get if you bought it if you waited for it when it comes out. So it's kind of like pre-ordering, but as a bonus, you get the book immediately. Although, as Michael mentioned, this version hasn't actually been tech edited yet, so you want to be careful following the advice in the book until it's been reviewed. But if you're the expert, you can find when something isn't quite right and let Michael know, and it'll get fixed. Yes, so early buyers get access to the draft and also the official release when that comes out. And the topics of the book include the geom layer, UFS, ZFS, all the different disk utilities, partitioning schemes, disk encryption, how to maximize your I/O performance, and all the great stuff. And yes, the suggested price is $7.99. Although you're welcome to pay more if you'd like. Next up, another giant Reddit thread called Why BSD and Not Linux? And there's basically a bunch of people talking about the various reasons for their choosing of one of those BSDs as opposed to using something like Linux. And to There's quite a few interesting conversations. Quite a few people say, features like ports, capsicum, carp, ZFS, dtrace, and things like that make BSD a very big win, especially over some other operating systems that don't have a lot of those features. Features like PF, Geli, IPFW, using Clang instead of GCC. Dragonfly BSD has Hammer FS and a bunch of interesting work in the kernel. OpenBSD has even newer via PF and lots of other security features and things like RelayD and their own HTTP server now. Over the years, the BSDs have clearly shown that their work in the Unix ecosystem pioneered many new features and driving adoption for others. We've seen OpenBSD get support for year 2038 and start Liberating SSL. FreeBSD leading the way with ZFS and do iSCSI stack and all that interesting stuff. And quite a few different users sharing their switching experiences. So it's definitely worth the read if you're interested in maybe making the switch. We have more news from the G2K14 hackathon at OpenBSD. And, last week we deluged you with a whole bunch of different trip reports, but there were more to come still. Landry Burrell spent some time with working on Ansible, making sure that works properly on OpenBSD, and working on the Firefox port and push some of those patches upstream to improve Firefox as well. Andrew Fesch enjoyed his first hackathon as a OpenBSD committer and pushed OpenBSD's Perl patches upstream, and also got tricked into rewriting the add user utility in Perl. And then Ted Euanks did his usual Teduing, which is to say removing old co. He removed ASA, FPR, MKSTR, XSTR, old Artist, FSplit, and UYAP, as well as some old Bluetooth code from the base system. And there's actually 20 more trip reports in there as well. So you should definitely check out those and see what else happened at their great hackathon. And also throw the spotlight over to BSD Talk, episode 243. Will Bachman had time to interview Ingo Swarzy, who's an OpenBSD developer who developed Mandoc, and talking about the changes he did there, and also their project to do the website, the new CGI interface for reading the man pages, the OpenBSD man pages on the website as well. But yes, Mandoc is a suite of tools for compiling MDoc, the ROF macro language of choice for writing BSD man pages, and the predominant historical language of Unix manuals. It's actually was recorded at BSDCan back in May of this year. And that's finally released, so you should definitely check that out. It was very nice to meet Ingo in the Doc Sprint lounge that we had at BSDCamp. In our feedback segment this week, Thomas writes in with a question about Beehive. He says, "Hello, BSD Now. He's been using OpenBSD on his laptop and his server for a few months now, but his main workstation is still Arch Linux. More and more, he dreads having to plug the keyboard into his Linux box, but he needs Linux for work. So he was wondering about the ability to create Linux VMs for projects and testing. So he says, is Beehive ready for this task? Ideally, he'd like to install FreeBSD 10 on his workstation and then run an OpenBSD VM to run his HTTP server and his FTP and all that kind of stuff, and then a second desktop, as well as having Linux VMs for work." And he lists his hardware specs, which is a fairly recent Intel Xeon E3. So a few things. So Beehive will do this, but currently Beehive is headless, so you can't run a desktop in it. So it'll run your OpenBSD VM to run your HTTP server, your SFTP, and SABN, ZBD, and your news groups and all that stuff. Will run perfectly fine in Beehive on top of FreeBSD. And you can run your Linux VMs as well, but there is only a serial console. There is no graphical console, so you can't run the desktop that way. Although, if you're running FreeBSD on the host system, you could just run the desktop that way. If you grab the there will be a new PCBSD stable snapshot coming out in just a couple of days for August. If you ran that, you would have all the latest Beehive patches that have been backported, although you might consider running FreeBSD 11 current instead of 10 stable. The advantage there is newer Beehive fixes, but it should mostly work on FreeBSD 10 stable. And you could use FreeBSD for the desktop, and then you would have OpenBSD can run your HTTPD and your Linux in it again. So Beehive will work. The only downside is you don't get a graphical console. Although FreeBSD will run VirtualBox as well, so you could do that if you needed to run your desktop or something in a VM. So Beehive is coming along, but there is no graphical console yet, just a serial console. But any modern or any i3, E3, or i5, E5, or i7, E7 will run the Beehive. Next up, we have a question from Stefan about Raspberry Pi. He says he's been trying the FreeBSD 10 snapshots of Raspberry Pi for a while, but he found that some of the snapshots didn't auto-expand the partition, and that FreeBSD update didn't work. So if the snapshots are of the stable branch, there is no FreeBSD update for that. That is kind of a downside. You'd have to run a release, and they didn't have ARMv6 images for releases for a while, but I think they will going forward now. So I think 10.1, which will come out in November, will actually have support for Raspberry Pi, and you'll be able to run FreeBSD update to get binary updates for it. Although, maybe not. I think FreeBSD update is i386 and AMD 64 only. So in that case, sorry, there is no FreeBSD update. You'll have to do binary updates manually by grabbing the later snapshot. And then he also mentioned about the growing the partition. I'm not sure if I like the idea of it growing the partition automatically anyway. Growing it yourself is actually pretty easy. I put the instructions in the FreeBSD handbook a while ago because I had to do exactly the same thing. Basically, you do gpart resize and the partition, and it will automatically resize to all available space, or you can specify the size with -s. And once you've grown the partition, then you can just grow the file system, and that's just growfs. And in all versions of FreeBSD 10, that can be done without unmounting the file system. So it's a fairly trivial process in order to expand the image once you've written it to your SD card to take up the whole SD card or some amount of space on it to have more free space than you would have with the default image. So hopefully support for the Raspberry Pi will get better, specifically release snapshots. But FreeBSD update is currently not supported for the other architectures. Next up, Shaul writes in. He says he's got a couple of non-technical questions, specifically about the change of the structure of the format of the show. For example, Chris saying we'll be back with our next segment instead of listing the segment specifically. That happened when a couple of times the order that we recorded the things in isn't the order we were actually putting them in the show, or sometimes when we'd be doing 2 interviews and he would say the wrong name, or when we moved the tutorial to the end, but or recorded it earlier and put it in a different place. And so it just makes the different chunks of the show more modular so that we can push them in around and drop them in where we need them. So that's why we did that. And then he also said about moving the tutorial to the end of the show or after the actual closing of the show. That I did at the request of a bunch of audio listeners, because obviously the tutorials, which a lot of the time consist of you listening to my keyboard, are not really that nice to listen to in the car. And so we put those at the end to make them easier to skip, rather than people missing out on this feedback section of the show, which is sometimes where the best part of the show is. And he also wondered if the two of us changed our approach to hosting the show. Not really. We try to, let it roll and so on. We don't try to take on too much of a tone with the show. This is supposed to be a fun show about BSD. And he asks, where do we draw the line between proper etiquette for the show and being in sync, and if the occasion arises, being willing to openly debate something? Chris and I will definitely openly debate something if we don't agree on something. We just happen to agree a lot. I know maybe, it'd be fun to have some more guests on that maybe didn't, so we could actually have arguments like that, but it doesn't at the same time, I don't want to invite people on the show just to argue with them. But, I definitely like to have a good debate with people. So I'd love to see more of that. If you have a contrary to opinion to one that I've expressed in the show or one that I hold, write into the show and we'll have you on for an interview and I will gladly argue with you. Usually the reason that I'm not arguing with anybody else is that most of the people we have on the show know a lot more than I do. And so I don't try to tell them otherwise. But yes, we don't try to make the show overly staunchy or anything. We just try to present the information in the best way that we can. And yes, so next up, Florian writes in about we had a viewer last week asking about backing up to USB disks. And he was saying part of the problem was he only had one available USB port or something. And outside of a USB hub or something, Florian mentions that there are also multi-disk enclosures. So they plug into your machine over one USB port, but actually contain a miniature RAID array or JBOD of multiple disks. That can work, although you might consider one that uses multiple, that attaches the disk separately because you might get more bandwidth, but maybe not. Anyway, you mentioned those and that, even if you don't have one big enough to hold 4 drives to do a RAID Z1 or something, a mirrored pool definitely has its advantages, especially for your backups. You want your backups to work. So that's definitely something you consider. And he writes in a little bit about a horror story he had where he had some FireWire disks that had 9 partitions containing his various Linux file systems, and the partition table got corrupted, and all of a sudden all of his data was gone. And that was not fun for him. And so he kind of wished that he had done mirrors for his backups as well. And then lastly, we have an important note coming from Bob Beck about the Liberating SSL, specifically using it on FreeBSD. He heard us talking with Brian Drury and getting a note from Baptiste Drosson of the package project mentioning testing FreeBSD ports against Liberating SSL. And he says that currently, FreeBSD is not actually a supportive platform of Liberating SSL because it has an intrinsic function called arc4 random that is the same one exists on OpenBSD, but OpenBSD has changed since it was imported to FreeBSD and is newer and works a little different now. And the FreeBSD one now is actually kind of problematic. It is only using RC4 or ARC4 for the random, and it's not as strong as they would like. And so technically, they don't actually recommend running Liberating SSL on FreeBSD. It's because the ARC4 random function isn't up to snuff and doesn't provide enough randomness. And there's actually been a patch submitted by Ted Unanx to update the FreeBSD ARC4 random, and that's currently under review by the security team, and there's work to get that problem solved. And then we'll be able to go ahead with this and not only have the more up-to-date ARC4 random from OpenBSD, but also be able to support Liberating SSL. So we have that email thread from Bob if you're interested in more of the details as well. And then, as usual, all of the tutorials and the feedback and everything we cover on the show is in the show notes. You can find links to everything that we talked about, and the original emails that we got from the viewers and all that fun stuff. And, if you can't get enough of Liberating SSL, with Brent's interview this week, Brent did a text-only interview with Undeadly, the OpenBSD's blog magazine. So you can definitely find out more stuff there about Liberating SSL and Brent. And then if you have a question or a comment or an idea for the show, or if you have a tutorial you'd like to send us, because we're running out of tutorials or ideas for them, you can write in to feedback@bsdnow.tv. We'd also love to hear from people that would like to be interviewed. If you're working on something interesting or have something interesting to talk about, or have just been using BSD for a long time, we'd love to talk to you and have you on the show. So definitely write into us and let us know. Also, if you're a big fan of PCBSD, if you tune in next week, we'll be doing a PCBSD special where Chris is going to give us a tour around his PCBSD machine and show you a lot of the new features they've been working on over the last while, and how they've been bringing the desktop to FreeBSD, and it's really interesting stuff. You should definitely check it out. So if you're if you want to watch the show live, we film on Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern, which is 1800 UTC. So if you show up then, you can watch the show being made live. If you like the earlier feedback, if you like to see the raw version of the show, you can see all the goofy stuff that goes on between segments, and you can watch us struggling with Chris's internet connection not working for half an hour, and all that great stuff. So we definitely look forward to seeing you again next week, when Chris will be joining me again, and we'll have that great PCBSD tour.